Hi, everyone. Well, this is probably going to be the last time we talk a little bit about Easter. We've talked about Holy Week. We talked about Palm Sunday. We celebrated Good Friday. We celebrated Easter Sunday. And we're coming back now into that sort of strange period. Sort of in terms of church history, today would have been the day that Jesus met Thomas, the disciple, and let him touch his wounds and let him experience him. And doubting Thomas has been perhaps misnamed, finally gets to say, my Lord and my God, and understand it. But the funny thing is that the period immediately after Jesus' death and before his ascension sometimes just gets relegated to being a footnote. There's only really Luke 24 or John 20 and 21 that really talk much about this period. And yet, to me, this is an exciting period because the thing is that we've been going through a very emotional. If you can imagine, the disciples had experienced great things happening. Then they experienced the sheer horror of Good Friday, and then they experienced the joy of Easter. But then we get a period of time afterwards where they get to sort of meet Jesus. And in fact, Luke 24 really only talks about the road to Emmaus, which is a very important story, and then sort of leads into the book of Acts really after that. But John's Gospel has 2 chapters, and in that there are sort of 4 events. There's meeting Mary Magdalene, there's Jesus meeting the disciples, there's Jesus meeting Thomas and the disciples, and then there's the boat at Galilee. And there's sort of 4 quite interesting events, and I just want to reflect a little bit upon them. But I think it's important to understand that, the emotions here are quite important as well. Human beings are emotional. As much as we like to think we're just rational, and we were taught by the Enlightenment that we're just rational. Anyone who studies economics, anyone who understands markets, anyone who understands human nature knows that's not the case. And to be perfectly honest, emotions are part of our makeup. They are part of creation. They're not something to be overcome. They're something to be understood. They're something sometimes that should never govern us, but we should understand that they are an important part of who we are. And at the same time that, Easter is a very, very important lens, an incredibly important lens for us to understand our faith and to understand our God. This is why communion or Eucharist or whatever we call it, the Last Supper, is such an important part of what we do as a church, because it brings us back to the crux of the matter, the lens of the matter, which is what God did for us on the cross. Jesus dying, Jesus conquering death, God pursuing mankind with love to the point of, allowing this destruction to happen. Just tells us of a God who is a mighty God, who is a loving God, and who is a powerful God. And I just feel that sometimes we lose that lens. Liberal theologians will often attack what they call the pre and post Easter writings of the Gospels, saying that the Gospels were written with after Easter, and therefore were rewritten in a bias that took away perhaps Jesus's political nature or this or that. It's very important because obviously it's the crux of our faith, Easter, the absolute crux. This is the point. This is the point where we know God comes and saves mankind, and that basically Jesus shows us the way, and it is absolutely critical to the Christian belief. But one of the things that I think comes out, and it comes out in the first encounter with Mary Magdalene, where she meets him at the tomb. She doesn't immediately see who he is. He reveals herself, and she clings to him, and he goes to cling to him. He says, "Don't cling to me, for I haven't gone to my Father yet." And I've always sort of struggled with this because I was thinking, Jesus is bigger than someone clinging to him. Our God is not the kind of God who's going to be sort of made unholy by someone touching them or something like that. But it is important because we do believe he goes up to the Father and then comes down, and that evening he appears to his disciples. So why is it in the Bible? And we know that he's not sexist, and it's not saying something against women, because we know God is not a sexist God. In fact, we know the theology very well, that actually, he treated women incredibly well in the context. Jesus lived in an incredibly sexist world. The Greco-Roman culture was brutally oppressive to women. And Jesus went against that culture very strongly, which is why you have the incidences with the washing of the hair, etc. So I don't think it was a sexist thing, but I think there is a statement here that he is now of another world, that things are different. don't forget, Jesus had raised people from the dead. So in itself, resurrection of Jesus is perhaps not as surprising as we would think it is. He raised, well, we know of at least 3 people: the widow of Nain, we know Jairus' daughter, and of course, spectacularly towards the end, Lazarus, all raised from the dead. And that Jesus could raise himself from the dead would perhaps be slightly logical. But there is something different about him after he was raised from the dead. Something that Pope Benedict XVI calls a very otherworldliness that I think is very important for us to grasp, because it's important to understand that after Easter, nothing was the same. And here Jesus is different. He is not the same anymore. And as he comes to his disciples and he sort of turns up in the middle of the room in a sort of ghost-like fashion, if you like, and says, "Peace be with you," as he walks into a locked room, he's not a ghost because he can eat and drink, but he's still Jesus and they recognize him. But the fact of the matter is he comes there with a mission, and he comes there and he breathes the Holy Spirit on people. They don't react immediately, but they are receiving the Holy Spirit at that point. And there begins a point of revelation. And I think this is really where I think we sometimes think that revelation is instantaneous. Remember Peter at Philippi has the revelation that Jesus is the Messiah, but cannot quite reconcile that revelation with the reality of Jesus' mission, because the moment Jesus says what's going to happen is, no, that's not going to happen. And he's then being accused, being told by Jesus, "Get behind me, Satan." Gone from hero to zero very quickly, because you can take the revelation, but the fact is it's how we apply the revelation that matters. And it's something I know from my professional life and spiritual life. It's not about the revelation we have, it's about how we apply it and how we go about doing it that is actually really where things are going to matter. And it is often in these cases that we get senses of failure, and our lens, the lens of Easter, the lens of restoration, the lens of God's wonderful power, sometimes gets fogged. And sometimes we need to wipe it clear, or get God to wipe it clear again for us, just to sort of give us that clear vision again. And it's really on that point, because the next 2 encounters are Jesus dealing with doubt and failure. Thomas becomes known as Doubting Thomas because he wasn't there on that first Sunday. So, as I said, on Resurrection Sunday, Mary in the morning, disciples in the evening, Thomas wasn't there. They tell Thomas, he just says, "Well, I'll believe it when I see it," kind of thing. And it's sort of held against him for eternity, if you like, or at the moment certainly seems to be the case. The following week, Jesus turns up, and of course he says to Thomas, "Here you are, touch, see, feel." Thomas is immediately, "Lord my God." Doubts are not a sin. Sometimes I think we can come from a background where if we doubt in the slightest, or we're not all there, that we think, "Oh no, we're terrible." Doubts are there to be addressed. And so when we have doubts, it's not that we are weak. In fact, I wish in my own life, if I was to be honest, I'd sometimes doubted a bit more often and stopped and thought a bit more often. I'm a bit like Peter. I'll go first, think later sometimes. And sometimes you appreciate people having doubts. It's bringing our doubts before God that really, really matters. And then it's not saying to God, "Take my doubts away from me." Sometimes it could be. What does God ask us to ask for? He says, he doesn't condemn us for our doubts. He just says, "Ask for faith." And I think sometimes we need to take that balance in our minds and say, there are times when we are scared, there are times when we doubt. And to be perfectly honest, most Christians after a number of years will probably have a few experiences of disappointments and letdowns, and disappointments with people, disappointments with God. I'll be honest to you, I don't know anybody who doesn't have them. I certainly have had a fair share of them in my life. And then that means that the next time you come to a steep step of faith, or the next time you come to something, you've got doubts. Jesus, the last time I stood here, you kicked me in the nuts. And Jesus just answered, "My next time to have your legs together." But it could be anything. It could be whatever it is. But the fact is that if we allow the clouds of our doubt and the clouds of our mists of our, past bad experiences or whatever to mist over the Easter story, we're not going to have the clear lens. And I just feel the Lord is saying, this is a new season, this is a new time. If we have doubts, there's nothing wrong with having those doubts. It's a time to bring them to me and wrestle with them. Be honest with them. Be honest with me about them. But it's a time to have faith as well. And let the faith work with the doubts. Let the faith overcome the doubts. Work with this. Be rational. God gave us a brain for a reason. It was not to take it out of our head and just walk in blind faith. We walk by faith. Do not get me wrong. We step out in faith. And I know there are times when we've really stepped out in faith and it has been truly scary and I've seen God come through. I even know at times I'm wondering, when are you going to come through? This is important because we need to learn that we don't operate as one-man shows. The church is not a one-man show. God is not a one-man show. Our faith walk is not a one-man show. It is us as a group of people, as a body of people, working together with the mighty God. And therefore, there should be doubts. If I'm truly honest to you, we should be stretching ourselves, because that way we know that God is in control and we know that we are together in this. And that to me is important. And sometimes I think, Thomas there, this is a wonderful piece in the Bible here of how God will come and reveal himself. And I love the passage in the Bible where it says, Jesus says to Thomas, who do not see me. And I love to count myself amongst that, because I personally have not physically seen Jesus. So, and I love that passage, and I agree with all my heart sometimes to say, this is a blessed place to be. Features in the high priestly prayer in John 17 as well. How blessed we can see Jesus, but we still believe. Sin in the doubt. It is how we handle the doubt and just sort of let it reconcile with us, and that is important. And it's something it's not something to be looked down upon. It is something to wrestle with, and it is something for us to deal with, because as we come into a new season, the first thing that will be thrown at us are the doubts of the last times we were going into a new season and it didn't happen, or something else, the previous disappointments. It's one of the few weapons that can be thrown against you. I always love the story of Winston Churchill. But one thing I always feel with him is he had one big failure, Gallipoli, and that haunted him. That was used against him. If you've ever seen the film and if you've ever read his biographies, the poor guy, he as a young soldier, he escaped from a prisoner of war camp in South Africa. He made one of the most daring escapes. He was a great politician, failure. And that failure was used against him time and time and time again until he was basically able to overcome it. And I think sometimes, don't be surprised if your past failures are thrown up in your face, because that's exactly what the enemy will do to you. He will throw every doubt and everything back at you. And then we come to this issue of failures and Peter and Tagbar. Peter had this most spectacular failure. And I know we've touched on it before, so I don't want to dwell on it forever. But again, it is just the wonderful way in which Jesus uses it. He just says, here you are, feed my sheep. And Peter, in terms of the church history, is incredibly significant. We know he fades out a bit and Paul comes more and more into the fore. But the fact of the matter is, what Peter did with Cornelius alone, we have the great sermon at the beginning of Acts, but what he did with Cornelius is one of the most fundamental strategic changes in human history ever. We cannot underestimate how important that was. So, he was still used. And again, our failures will be thrown at us as much as our doubts. But the fact of the matter is I just really strongly feel that as we come into a new season, I just strongly feel we're being told, wipe the lens, let God wipe the lens of Easter, and let us look back at the great and wonderful power. Because what was propelling those disciples, what was keeping them praying so earnestly after everything that had happened, was the sheer power and emotion of seeing the resurrected power of Christ. And the problem is sometimes we sort of think now that Jesus is sat next to God high up in some stellar place. That's not true. Heaven is not some sort of far-off star and galaxy miles away or whatever, and God's sat in the control room in the Holy Spirit doing all the work. That's not what this is about. Heaven, as Karl Barth puts it, the great theologian, is what we don't see. Earth is everything we do see. So Earth is the star system as well. and this planet Earth is everything we can see, touch, feel, know from a physical reality. Heaven is everything, if you like, that we don't know from that physical reality. So the heavenly realm is everything we can't see, but we believe is out there. And that is important because Christ is close to us. And it's not just Karl Barth. It's what, I just read Pope Benedict's book on Holy Week. It's what he says as well. And it's what lots of other people teach you. It is, the heavenly realm is just very, very close. Jesus is still very, very close to us. In fact, the whole point of him ascending is so that he can be there next to the Father, right by us, constantly there for us. And we have that hope, and we have that strength, and we just have to sometimes look at the doubt and look at the failures and look them in the eyes. Just look them in the eyes and say, yes, part of my history. Disciples had that too. So guess what? We're still going to go ahead. We still believe. We still have faith. I'm going to wipe my lens clear. Look at that Easter story of the God who passionately, absolutely passionately pursues humans to the point where he allows them to crucify him. He allows all of sin and pain to be upon him. He allows himself to suffer and then come back victorious, absolutely short-circuiting all the devil's plans. All of everything that is basically there to bind mankind is blown away. The temple is pulled, the temple curtain is pulled apart. Worship is now man and God on a whole new level. And right now, I believe that is so important because this message of hope needs to go out there. People need to see it, but we need to be living it ourselves. And I just feel God saying to us, wipe the lens, come back, just look at the Easter lens again, just look at this story and just let him work in us. And understand this, there is this point in the road to Emmaus, there's a point with Peter. Revelation is not an instant 100% thing. Quite often revelation is bit by bit, bit by bit, bit by bit. And sometimes, we can look back at that past and go, oh, if I only knew now if I knew then what I know now, things would be different. Yeah, well, that's actually human reality. We all wish we had the brain we had now and the body we had 20, 30 years ago. Boy, it would be dangerous if we did. But the fact of the matter is that revelation is a progressive thing. So God will reveal to us as and when he knows. And he knows that we are all part of a body. So the revelation, you might feel ready for the next thing, but he's got the whole body in mind. Not just us. So as this whole revelation thing happens, he is working and thinking the whole body together. And, we can and we will get more and more revelation. We can ask for it. We can seek it. We certainly should be praying for it the way perhaps the disciples prayed for it, and looking for it. So I encourage you over the next few weeks, just be relaxed, but just be looking for the revelations, looking for God to just show you his lens again, asking him in those little quiet moments, if you're stood in the kitchen loading the dishwasher for the 15th time that week or whatever, and you can think of lots of things. Just think, God, sat on the tube or climbing the stairs to your next commute or whatever it is. Just ask God, what is it you want to show me? There's plenty of time. We can breathe. We can take the right rhythm, but let's get the revelation and let's just get a clear lens with God. God bless you all this week.